commercial product that may or may not be there, there's no possible way that comes to a good end. Real programs that go for any length of time have to have a consistent and constant purpose for that length of time. You cannot change the requirements. That's another of the three leading causes of program failure. You have to outline the purpose and you have to stick to it. If it's a publicly funded effort, the purpose has to be judged in the public mind to be a worthy purpose. You have to have the public behind you. NASA always has. In 1 million Gallup polls that have been done over the years, most of which I've seen, I've never seen NASA have less than 65% public approval and never more than 75 or 80% with naive polling. That's an incredible record. When people say what NASA needs to do is get out there and generate more public approval, in a country where 20% of the people can't find Florida on the map, getting more than 70% public approval is not going to happen. I mean, find a politician who wouldn't like to get elected with 70% of the vote. Nobody ever does. Well, I shouldn't say that. Few people ever do. Find a product in the marketplace that would turn down 70% market share. There's no such product. So when NASA repeatedly and routinely polls and gets 70% public approval, it's not that the space agency or the space program or the goals of the space program lack public approval. That's not the problem. So we have a worthy purpose as judged by human beings. And I would submit that some of those worthy purposes, certainly people liked Apollo. I think a real program dedicated to establishing and sustaining a lunar base would attract public support. I think a real program aimed at getting humans to Mars within the lifetime of the taxpayers who have to pay for it would sustain public interest. I question whether asteroid expeditions would be such a worthy goal, but I think there are worthy human spaceflight goals that the nation could adopt and could pursue. But there has to be one, and right now I'm not seeing one. So this takes me to what I think of as my larger issues. I've been picking at some of what I consider actually to be the smaller issues associated with the administration's plan, even though I think they're pretty significant. But the larger issues, the smaller issues, can come about only in an environment in which there are elephants in the room. There are unspoken larger issues about which we need to speak and are not. For example, what is the role in a democratic society of a government-funded, a publicly funded space program? That's what we need to be talking about. I think that the Augustine Committee got it about right in this respect. They said the purpose of it is to expand human presence out into the solar system. Now, why should we do that? Well, that provides our society with what I'll call leadership on a frontier, the frontier of human progress. Why should we care? Well, leadership on the frontier provides a society with a number of different things. I'll be very specific. I think it is a form of national security. Great nations have to do many difficult things in their role as global leaders. Certainly this was the case when the world was the British Empire plus a few other people. And it's the case now when the United States is certainly the leading global power, a nation with 5% of the world's people that has 25% of the world's economy. Others want to be global strategic powers, and they will be, and possibly should be. But if we want to remain a global power, then leadership on the frontier is an element of national security. Why? Because it enables us to do things that everybody wants to be part of, and we can be a leader. It attracts partners, it attracts allies in a common enterprise which everybody likes. That is a huge factor to offset the fact that we have to sometimes do things that others don't like so much. There is no better form of national security than accumulating partners and allies in common cause. And it's cheap at the price. It's way better than the kind of national security that comes from having better guns and bombs than everybody else. It's the kind of national security that comes from having people who want to be with you, despite differences in other areas. Secondly, human exploration at the frontier inevitably results in enormous amounts of scientific discovery. I am very tired of hearing my scientist friends point out that robots can do it better. They can if you know exactly what you want them to do. But geologist friends of mine have pointed out that the total amount of exploration accomplished by Spirit and Discovery on the surface of Mars could be done by a human being in a week or two, which is not to eschew robotic exploration. I would never do that. I've spent a lot of my career on robotic space missions, and they're great. But again, it's not an either-or proposition. Scientific discovery is accomplished and accomplishable by human beings, and it never lets us down. So that's worth the price of admission alone. The technology development we have to undertake to do the things we have to do to operate at the frontier ricochets through all of society. I mean, pull out your cell phone. You wouldn't have it except for the space program. You wouldn't have any microelectronics industry except for the space program. And oh, by the way, not just the civil space program and not just the military space program, but both of them. The civil space program had the more stressing requirements, but the military space program had to have producibility. And without both stressing requirements and producibility, you wouldn't have that BlackBerry that you carry around. And finally, economic. When we get new technology, when we get scientific discovery, when we operate at the frontier, it drives the economy. We have lived for 40 years off the seed corn of Apollo, and I think we've about eaten it all. And oh, by the way, when I talk about the economy, I also do include the creation of new markets, such as will result for commercial space transportation when the government has a robust and vigorous space program requiring the delivery of a lot of just plain bulk cargo to orbit. That will be an obvious economic market. But the way to get that is to have a government requirement that is known to be decadal in span, rather than trying to create a capability and then ask what it shall do. So our fundamental issue that I'll finish up within a couple minutes here is this. Do we want to have a real space program or not? Does this nation want to have a real space program or not? Yes. A real space program goes somewhere. It goes somewhere interesting in the judgment of a reasonable majority of the people. There are some multiple choices out there, but the geography of the solar system is such that right now there aren't too many of those. So a real space program goes somewhere. It goes somewhere worthy. It does something worthy when it gets there. It does it in a time frame that is of interest to normal human beings. And if the goals are very large, then it gets there by means of stepped goals, which are themselves of interest in reaching the larger goal. The Rome wasn't built in a day saying isn't an old saying because it's wrong. So we do things with a real space program that are worthy. We do things, and they're worthy, and we do them on timescales that are of interest to normal human beings. And then we decide, yeah, we're going to do that, and we're going to pay for it. We don't decide that we're going to do it on half of what people tell you is needed and tell them to figure out a way. That's not how you do it. The other alternative is we can just talk about having a real space program. We can just talk about it. We've been talking about having a real space program for the best part of the last 40 years. So I would say that we have the existence proof that talking about having a real space program is really not working. We should try something different. Thank you. I'm open to questions for 20 minutes.
Robots are developing very, very quickly, and it appears to me that within 50 to 100 years they will be functioning at and above the human level. So will live astronauts become obsolete by 2100? I wouldn't be at all surprised if if by then we will not need to be in space. Just let our robot children do that.
Well, I get the point, and I'm not going to argue with the technical conclusion. I'm going to argue with the philosophical conclusion. As Norm Augustine famously said 20 years ago in the first Augustine Committee report, landing an instrumented package on top of Mount Everest is not the same as climbing Mount Everest. If the purpose of the human space program is to expand the human range of action, then robots don't do that for me. Now, if they do it for you, that's fine, but they don't do it for me.
So long as intelligence spreads off the Earth, that's the good thing.
Right. I'm not gonna, that's not a debatable point, and I'm not here to debate you.
Okay.
Okay? Your point that robots may be more capable than humans, I will accept as true, and it's utterly irrelevant.
Dr. Griffin, first, I very much enjoyed the analysis that you provided about the Obama space plan. I do have a specific question for you, though, about an element of the Senate bill that passed last night. To me, probably one of the most important aspects is a focus on immediate development of a heavy lift vehicle,
right.
Specifically a shuttle-derived vehicle by 2016. And I just, obviously recognizing that you've thought and long and hard about this, is 2016 reasonable for the type of shuttle-derived vehicle that is specified in light of the funds provided? And I guess would also be interested in your thoughts on the usefulness of that type of vehicle for a true exploration architecture. Thank you.
Well, Ares 5 was a shuttle-derived vehicle. Ares 1 is a shuttle-derived vehicle. There is no, I mean, I could drive a locomotive through that language. Right. The question is, what payload do you need for human exploration? A variety of careful studies back up your intuition that the Saturn V capability, roughly 130 metric tons to low Earth orbit, if I just reference everything to low Earth orbit, that capability is about the lowest useful capability for exploration beyond LEO. It has to do with packaging human beings. So if you're going to build a, quote, heavy lifter that fields less than the Saturn V in one launch, now you're into multiple launches, and the more launches you have to accomplish a given mission, the higher the mission risk, generally the higher the expense. You fairly rapidly price yourselves out of the market. Even more significantly, until there is no further future for liquid hydrogen in space, which I think is going to be a while, any of our interplanetary vehicles and landers will need liquid hydrogen. Liquid hydrogen has the annoying property that it's not very dense. So you need large volumes to accommodate it. So over and over again, what we at NASA found out, like it or not, is that shroud diameter matters a lot. So core vehicle diameter matters a lot. So for example, if someone wants to be very literal about a shuttle-derived vehicle and use a 27.5-foot external tank, something like 8 meters, a little close enough, that really is not as good as having a larger diameter, 10 meters or bigger, in very significant ways. And so even if I have 150 metric tons total delivered to Earth orbit by, say, making it up, 2 75 metric ton, 27-foot diameter vehicles, it's not as good as 150 metric ton, 10-meter diameter shroud. These things matter. There are an enormous number of people who fancy themselves to be space systems engineers who just are not. And details matter.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir?
What are your thoughts on using a lunar base as a kind of a pilot base for a long-term Mars base?